When you started doing this, were you with your long-term partner already?
Yeah.
So she saw you go through the process of starting this journey. Did she make any observations about you throughout it, like how it affected you?
She thought I was batshit crazy. And after a massive breakdown, she found me hanging.
Oh God, really?
Yeah.
God, I didn't know about that, Mike.
Yeah.
So Mike, welcome back. It's the third video we've done together. It's great to see you again. I'm going to be getting into what you've been doing and what's changed. But first of all, I think there is one very big change, isn't there?
Yeah. I'm no longer paedophile hunting. It's been a mad journey, mad journey. But it was necessary, it was necessary to kind of come away from that and go in the direction that I've gone in.
What I'd love to do for potentially new viewers who didn't see the other videos we did together is go right back to the beginning and for you to take me through your story a little bit, what led you into paedophile hunting in the first place.
Yeah, of course. So I went through some stuff when I was younger that I really shouldn't have done. I saw obviously a paedophile online getting stung in a sting video and thought, I could... more than anything, I think I was looking for answers. I never got those answers, but I was looking for answers, so obviously I decided to start a team and start going out and catching predators. And
what age are you when you saw that first video?
I'm 36 now, so I was about 30, 31.
30. Because what I find sort of interesting about that is if that was me seeing that video, obviously I have different experiences to you, so it wouldn't have the same impact, but I wouldn't know where to start. What was the building blocks of beginning from seeing that video to forming a team?
For me, like from the beginning of starting, it wasn't necessarily about what the predator was doing or their behaviour. For me, I was more bothered about the safeguarding surrounding that. So any children that he had access to or she had access to, it was, for me, the bigger picture was trying to protect those kids. So I started out with one team, volunteering for them, and I started out as a decoy.
Oh, so you started out working for another team that already existed?
Yeah. It wasn't long lasted because their view on safeguarding wasn't the same as mine. So I kind of got a bit OCD with things and started my own team. I did have a mentor who kind of helped me through, and he's still to this day a good friend of mine. But yeah, it's not the easiest of things to get into.
No, I mean, so I assume did you just message a group on Facebook and say you're interested in helping?
Yeah.
And then you say they set you up as a decoy?
Yeah.
What did that involve? Like, what was the first thing that you ever had to do?
Speaking to paedophiles, basically, like that, it is pretty much what it is. And that wasn't easy. As someone that's with a past like mine, it's not, I had no idea when I was going into it exactly what kind of effect that was going to have long term. Right then I just thought I was kind of trying to get the answers that I needed. So
is it like internet or like is it on your laptop? Or
on your phone. So it was different apps, and obviously you go on as a child, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
It's that simple.
That fast, yeah.
God, like even the first time you'd ever done it.
Yeah. Within 20 minutes of me doing it, I was speaking to 2 people who I ended up building a case on.
Within 20 minutes of the first time you've ever tried to... God, that's sort of a terrifying thing to hear. Do you think that's an unusual situation, or is that...
No, it's everywhere. The media might play it down, but it is everywhere.
And when you say within 20 minutes, is that because the apps have a global reach, so you're basically talking to potentially the whole world, or is that like local to...
No, these were people in the UK.
God, right. And your reward for doing it after the sting was basically the knowledge that that person wasn't talking to a child, they were talking to you. And then...
No, well, it's not even that. It's if they've got access to children. Mm-hmm. Say, there was quite a few people that we caught who were parents. So this person's living a double life, living in a house with his sons or his daughters, or his sons and daughters, and he's chatting to children, what he believes to be children, sexually online. Like, what about his children? Who's checking them? So for me, it goes back to that power of one thing.
The power of one is something, I think you made that up for your own mantra, wasn't it?
It was, to believe it or not, it was my mentor that taught me about that. It started out, if you can make a difference in one person's life in a day, then why are you not going to do that? But then once you've done one, carry on and carry on. Whereas for me, all I wanted to do was stop one kid going through what I went through as a child. And then obviously I multiply that as many times as I could.
But the base level was always making the difference to one life. Anything above that, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's go back. So you've done your first kind of conversation via text. When did it progress to you doing your first sting, to actually being face-to-face with an offender?
I'd started my own team, and I had some decoys that come with me from the team that I'd volunteered with, and we kind of set up Dark Light. But they'd already been speaking. One of them had already been speaking to a guy who was based in Darlington, and it happened very, very quickly. Like I didn't expect it to happen that quick. We literally had the evidence. He was meant to turn up with his camper van and take a 13-year-old girl to a campsite, where he intended on obviously doing what he said he was going to do. He failed to turn up at the meeting point, but we found out that he had children. So we managed to track down his address, and we went to Darlington and stung him.
I confronted him at his house?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did that, like, the first time you're doing something like that, how, like, going into it, how did it feel?
The adrenaline was mad.
Yeah.
I think when I got home, I literally sat up all night and just kind of, it was kind of an awakening, but at the same time, it was like, what just, you know what I mean? What just happened?
I imagine a lot of emotions to process.
Yeah, it's an emotional thing, but more than anything, like, I'll be honest, the first one, it was that element of guilt.
Oh, really?
Because I'd gone in and obviously, even though he'd done wrong, I saw his wife's reaction. And that, you know, I kind of went away with mixed emotions from that, which I had to detach myself from. You know, it took me a while to kind of get my head around that. But it's not, you know, it's not the wife. It's them that's brought us to their door. You know, it's the perpetrator that's brought us to their door. So
with situations like that, when you turn up at someone's door, I can imagine for the partner, there's probably a feeling of maybe denial. Disbelief. But then I guess you turn up with a body of evidence that proves it's the case. Was that the case in this time? Like, was it something that you could see that she knew was true? You know, was she telling you to leave? Was she telling you to get away? It's not him, or?
No, it was, the way she described it afterwards was that when we arrived just before 7:30, he was the most kind, loving person that she'd ever met. And then obviously when we turned up and she'd seen the evidence and he'd admitted what he'd done, she said, "You've left me with a monster." God. You know? Yeah. But the thing is, from the first one, we always made sure if there was going to be a spouse present that we had females that would go in with a copy of the evidence to show them if they wanted to see it, to make them understand the reasons as to why we were there.
I guess it's such a complicated thing as well for her to process, isn't it? Because like when you say, she said you've left me with a monster, but she was living with a monster. It's just you've kind of shown her the reality of who he was. That
was the whole concept of Dark Light. It was about being that light, you know, exposing them for what they really are.
So with the first one, you've gone in there, you've confronted someone face to face. Prior to this, you've been doing it by text, right? You've been doing decoy work, you've been messaging. This is the first one you've face to face. What did it feel like as someone who had experienced the kind of trauma that you had as a young person to see someone face to face that you knew was capable of inflicting that on someone else?
It's a good question, though. Scarily, there was like an eerie calm that came over me. And I think, you know, since I've stopped doing that, I've spoken to a professor in psychology, and what that actually comes down to, the whole hunting thing, is trauma, what's called trauma reenactment. So actually what I was doing, I was not reliving my own trauma, but I was going through the trauma process to try and get control over what happened to me when I was a kid, because I had no control over it.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
it's like you're trying to repeat the thing that happened, but this time you're the one that's in control.
Yeah, I was in control. It took me a while to get my head around it, but once I finally got my head around it, it made perfect sense.
And then following on from that, would that mean that every sting you did after that was a form of trauma reenactment?
I would say so, yeah.
And so were you finding closure by doing them?
No, I was still seeking answers at that point. I think when I started out, I really, really wanted answers.
To what?
I don't know. I don't know. But then I realised that it's not actually answers that I need, it's acceptance, if that makes sense. Like, there's nothing I can do to change what happened to me as a kid. Nothing. So the way I see it is that I can't keep going back. I can't keep living in the dark. I can't keep concentrating on everything that's negative about the trauma that I went through, when there's so many positive things that have come out of it. With, it's kind of in a direction of what I'm doing now, and moving away from the hunting side of it.
So you do the first sting, it's a success, I guess you'd call it. How many do you think you did up to the point you decided to call it a day? How many stings do you think you're involved in?
I don't even know. Say probably about 400 or 500. Different.
Right.
Well, that's not necessarily me going out and stinging them, but that's giving advice to other teams, or trying to track them, or making sure there's enough evidence within the chat log to be able to get the police to charge them. It's a really, really intricate thing to do, and you've got to make sure it's done right. So obviously there was a lot of, when new teams came about, I'd like to help them, if that makes sense, because I started out not knowing anything. So, I wanted to try and help as many people get it right as we could, because again, it just comes back to the power of one and safeguarding.
One of the comments in the previous video that a few people said was, "Oh, this is legally entrapment, and it means they can't be prosecuted."
Entrapment was messaging them. I say I'm not doing it anymore, but entrapment would be a paedophile under our hunting group sending the first message. That never happens, ever.
So how do you make them send the first message to you?
The profiles are dormant. It's just profiles of what appear to be young kids set up on, Facebook and things like that. And then they'll send the first message. And obviously they'll get a reply as a child. And then right the way through it will be.
And do you sort of early doors say the age of the profile?
Yeah, within the first few messages.
And are we talking about on the edge, like 15, 16, or are we talking about...
No, 11, 12, 13.
God. And then it continues?
Yeah, every time. There's the odd one that blocks, but then 9 times out of 10 they'll unblock, and...
It's almost testing the water a little bit. So with the profiles, the other thing that I noticed that some people are asking about is, do you use pictures of real children in them? No,
never.
How do you set up those?
When my page was up and running, there was 160,000 people on it. We had a big following. So what we'd do is we'd request from our followers historic pictures of them as children to be donated to us, so we could use those pictures to obviously speak to the predators and build profiles around their pictures. Obviously, and in doing that, they'd donate the pictures, and we'd have a signed agreement with them that we can use their pictures, and that we won't keep them informed of any cases that their pictures are used in. But it's never pictures of real children. It just defeats the object on it.
Obviously, when you're talking to these people, I imagine some of the messages are deeply unpleasant. I've watched a couple of documentaries that have been made by different companies online about sting operations, stuff like that. It always seems like there's two types of people: the ones that break down into tears because they realise what's just about to happen to them and what's now happened to the rest of their lives, and the ones that are almost like
in denial.
Yeah. Was that your experience?
Yeah.
What was the kind of typical reaction to being stung?
They go grey.
Really?
Yeah. But I used to find, it sounds a bit sadistic, but I used to find pleasure in that. I used to love watching the colour drain out of them, because then the pennies dropped. There's that realisation that they've fucked, basically. But again, I've not done it for so long now. It's mad even looking back and thinking about it. to be honest.
But doing that as a kind of consistent thing over and over again, it must give you a bleak view of the world, right?
I think in doing something like that, you're looking at the world, but you're only looking at the darkness in the world, if that makes sense. You're only concentrating on the worst of the worst. So it does give you a bleak outlook on the world, but when, I don't know, there's a lot of teams out there that are still doing it, a lot of teams that are still active, and, I take my hat off to them, genuinely I do, but I couldn't be in that dark space anymore. It is a very, very dark space to be into, especially when you've got real parents contacting you and their kids have been groomed and things have. It's just.
Would that happen? People after
constantly,
the fact, really?
Yeah, constantly.
What would they want from you?
One case in particular was 2 young girls, and the grandmother contacted me, and they'd been groomed on a tablet that their father had left in the house after mum and dad had split up, and the eldest girl went on the tablet. No one realised because he just thought she was playing on Barbie games and she'd actually been speaking to somebody on an app that dad had left on the thing. She was groomed, took onto 2 other platforms, made to do things to herself.
Oh, God.
She was only 8, and made to take pictures of her sister in a bath. And the grandmother contacted me and she said, social services have done nothing. Now, I'm not taking shots at professionals, but social services have done nothing. The police were obviously investigating it, but the eldest girl had given out the address to the perpetrator of a home, and she was petrified that they were going to come round. And the social worker did, in speaking to the council, wasn't looking to get him relocated or anything like that. But the girl was traumatised by the fact that she'd done some of these things in the bathroom to herself, and she was wet in the bed, and she ended up with an eating disorder and all these different things, and no one was helping them. So she contacted me, and obviously I rang around the local authority and tried to do things as much as I could. Not that I had any special powers, but try and do things to help.
Did they ever find the perpetrator?
Not that I know of, no.
When you say that she was left an iPad that then she was groomed on, I think a turning point in my mind was, I suppose before doing the first video with you, I'd seen the paedophile as a kind of hysteria, like something that the tabloids drop into if it's a slow news day, where they say, oh, there's this paedophile panic around the country. And I suppose it was something that I thought was probably a danger, but not prevalent. It was something I thought they, boosted up for kind of like numbers. And I remember we were in that room back there, and you put an app on your phone and said, look, I'll show you. And you just opened.
Before we shot.
Yeah, before we shot. And you opened an app and said, I'm showing you how to search for paedophile groups in this app. And you did it. And it wasn't like 5. It was like you couldn't ever.
It was hundreds, yeah.
Hundreds, yeah. You couldn't ever get to the bottom of the scroll of them. And that really shocked me because.
That app's still active. It's still active right now.
But I guess. Do you think this is something that's always been there and it's just not been as well known, or do you think it's something that's getting worse?
Paedophilia has always been there. And it's always going to be there. It's just with the boom of social media and these things, it just makes it so much easier for people to be a completely different entity behind a screen. You can be anyone you want to be behind a screen, and I think that's where the real problem lies, is because a vulnerable young girl or young boy who's speaking to someone online, they might be vulnerable because the parents don't pay attention, or they've got significant trauma going on at home or within the family, and they're kind of detached away from the family unit kind of thing, and they've got this person showering them with compliments and praise and you're amazing kind of stuff, and obviously they buy into it, don't they, because it's smoke and mirrors. And that's how so many kids get dragged into it. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm. It is. And do you think that a lot of the parents are sort of the mindset I was, where it's not as big an issue and therefore leave devices to be sort of used by kids without being checked frequently.
I think since paedophile hunting is, you know, that's one thing I can say is that it's definitely increased the level of awareness, but still there's that common misconception that it won't happen to my kid.
Mm-hmm. What was your proudest moment during that period of your life, would you say?
The young girl from the first video. We'd caught someone. I mean, looking back, the sentencing was ridiculous. He only got 8 years. But, yeah, she'd been raped off him from the age of 12 right the way through to 16, and she never told anyone. And she saw his picture on our page, and she contacted us, and then obviously we ended up putting her in contact with the police. And the day after we'd stung him, she went and gave evidence.
And that contributed to his sentence, right?
But he was a reoffender.
Right. So with cases like the girl that you just mentioned, the first one, obviously that's made a massive impact on you because all these years later it's, you know, it's something you remember as your proudest moment. Do you stay in touch with victims like that?
Yeah, she just had a baby.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you get to see how their lives progress afterwards?
Yeah. There's not massive flare, but with her in particular, yeah, I ended up keeping in contact with her. And she's, you know, she's doing incredibly well. She got closure from that. And, you know, you think of the average age of people disclosing and people talking about being abused and raped and all of these different things. For her to have done that at 17 years old is huge. And I'd like to think that that's probably the fact that she's got to do that so young. She's been able to deal with some of the trauma earlier on in her life as opposed to later on in her life. And obviously having the baby will now contribute to her having that stability in life that other people might not have, you know, if they've not disclosed so young.
In general, what was your relationship like with the police? Because obviously what's presented to us by the media is that the police and the kind of paedophile hunters are kind of constantly butting heads and getting in each other's way.
So if it's done properly, you know, I've had, offender officers that deal with sex offenders saying that we're the eyes and ears on the ground. You know, paedophile hunters are the eyes and ears on the ground. And this one officer said to me, she says, I've got 125 offenders that I need to deal with in a week or, you know, whatever period of time that was. And she said, I just haven't got the time to be able to look for the others or look for the ones that are reoffending or, you know, so she said, you are the eyes and the ears on the ground, but that's one police officer. I never had a bad, you know, I never had a bad interaction with the police, but obviously there's, you know, a lot of police in the top offices are against it. The ones on the ground aren't.
You're somebody that, through all the videos we've made together so far, you've got strong opinions, of course. The line of work you were in leads to strong opinions, but I've never felt like much anger from you at all. I've never felt much, like I've felt very strong opinions about what you've just said about stuff being sickening. Like, I think it'd be hard for me to have done what you've done and not be really pissed off all the time. Not just from the people you encounter, but from what you say about like putting all that effort in and then small sentences, seeing it not being resourced properly, people being ignored. Like, is that just your personality, or is that something you try to?
No, I'm calm, man. What's the way I see it is there's no point, and this is something I've kind of grown to realize. There's no point holding on to negative shit. It serves me no purpose. I'm like, with the stuff I went through, I'm not in control of it. I'm not in control of the decisions that the government make in terms of funding. So I can't, that's someone else's shit to carry. I can't take up all my time worrying about all these different things when I've got a lot of other things in life to worry about.
When you started doing this, were you with your long-term partner already?
Yeah.
So she saw you go through the process of starting this journey. Yeah. Did she make any observations about you throughout it, like how it affected you? She
thought I was batshit crazy. And after a massive breakdown, she found me hanging. So...
Oh, God, really?
Yeah.
God, I didn't know about that, Mike.
Yeah.
Was that after we'd met previously,
Yeah.
or was that right? God.
So this is when you look at that and you look at the overall trauma reenactment thing, I didn't see how well it was making me.
Right. And do you think it was that doing that job that led you down that path?
Yeah.
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 God.
All kind of like a train stopping and it all backing up. But I'm still here.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to her.
Mm-hmm. And was that part of what pushed you into giving it up?
Yeah, because, well, it's not just that. I was spending so much time away from my family. You know, I'd gone from being, you know, running my own company, being a full-time dad, putting my daughter to bed. My daughter was little at the time. Giving her a bath, you know, doing the weekend thing, and I was never in. I was always out going up and down the country. Never saw my family. Family fell apart. A load of madness happened. And then I tried going back to it, but I needed a way out. And obviously the way out I found was by realising that instead of me trying to face it head on, I need to accept the past for what it is and try and move forward away from it. And that's what I did.
Do you think at that point, when you talk about the sort of family unit breaking down a bit, do you think it had moved into an obsession?
Not an obsession as such, but I think I was still at that point. I wasn't in recovery. I was still very broken. And at the same time, I think I was struggling. Like I said last time, I was kind of struggling with my identity. And to have realised who I am and what I'm about and what my morals and principles are, and to have gone through the recovery process into healing now, I can see that obviously doing what I was doing was part of a stepping stone of me getting better and being able to move forward with my life, because now my family's never been happier than it is.
Mm-hmm. It stood out to me that I think what you said on the phone was, you were like, this is as big as a video, this is as big as I can get.
Yeah, it's as big as the awareness that I could have put out there.
And you said it felt like no one cared.
Yeah.
And when you say no one, you mean people who could actually make a difference.
Yeah. But somebody said to me after that video, it's all good doing that video, but, you know, for you to make change in the system, you've got to be a part of it. So that's what I did.
I think we're going to talk to somebody that's helped you do that, aren't we?
We are.
Danny? So when I phoned you this time, I texted you, didn't I?
Yeah.
Because I sort of like tend to stay in touch with people a little bit, and dropped you a line, said sort of, how are you doing? And said we're thinking about doing a video, catching up with people, seeing where they're at now. And you said, I'm happy to do one, but there's two differences. I'm going to have my mask off, and there'll be two of us. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, this is my best mate, pretty much. While I was paedophile hunting, Dan was doing his own thing around male survivors of sexual abuse and trauma. And basically, I was watching him, he was watching me. I sent him a message. I went to the peer support group that he was running, and it was that completely changed everything for me, because I was in a room full of big burly men who were talking about things that were sensitive. And yeah, he gave me he opened the door for me to be able to speak, give me permission to speak, and helped me to get onto the road of recovery.
Do you want to take us through what that was, Dan?
Yeah, so I was on social media and I was watching all these paedophile stings, and I didn't really like the way they was doing things, and I come across Mike, and he seemed dead calm, and he wasn't shouting, and he was getting results and stuff, and I thought, it's great what he's doing, but personally, with my kind of sort of background and the trauma I've been through, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't have the patience, and I don't think I could keep my hands off him, if I'm quite honest. So that wasn't a route that I wanted to go down, but I had admiration for what he was doing, because I so wanted to do it. What I was doing at the time was campaigning for men, trying to hold people to account from councils who'd let people down in care, who'd said nothing, screaming and shouting outside Westminster with a megaphone and at Speaker's Corner. But I wasn't getting anywhere. No one was listening. I was just some crazy person who was shouting. That's how I dealt with my trauma. That anger was like sort of coming out that way. And he was watching me doing what I was doing, he was thinking, how can he speak about this so publicly and like not have any like sort of shame around what had happened to him and stuff. And
do you mind me asking, was yours rooted in sexual abuse as well?
Yeah. So one of the people who sexually abused me was a family member, which was from 5 to 10. Then when I was older, through my home life and stuff like that, my mum not being around and that, left to like sort of different family members, passed around the family, been to loads of different schools because of my behaviour. That was a result of the trauma that I went through when I was younger. I didn't have the words to talk about it, so it came out in behaviours where I'd be like sort of really naughty in school. I've been to loads of different schools, kind of sort of moved about. Nobody ever asked me why. Nobody ever sat me down and said, Daniel, what is up with you? Why are you behaving like this? I was just labelled a little shit, basically, which followed me through to secondary school. And what my granddad had done when he sexually abused me is he smashed my boundaries. I became one of them kids who never say no. So I'd be like, Daniel, do this, Daniel, do that. And I'd do it because I wanted to fit in, wanted a sense of belonging, wanted people to love me and like me, essentially. But my boundaries was down. And when I got to 15, I was befriended and groomed by a local drug dealer from our area who got me selling drugs through in school and stuff. And he my dad wasn't around and he sort of took me under his wing and stuff. By the time I was 15 and a half, I had a habit on heroin and crack. I was coming in school absolutely smashed. Nobody said nothing. There was a guy 10 years older than me picking me up from school. No teachers ever questioned why. I was coming in school with a mobile phone. Nobody had mobile phones at that point, and I was walking about, I think I was bad, with a mobile phone clipped to my belt and that. But what he was doing was...
no one ever picked up on any
Nobody ever asked me why. It was all about my behaviour.
Do you think at that point they'd just written you off?
They'd just written me off. The message what I got told at school was... by the time you leave school, by the time you get to 18, you're going to end up in prison or dead. And I kind of sort of took that stuff on board and it became like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I did end up in prison. The way I communicated what had happened to me was through my behaviour, through misbehaving, through attention seeking, through smashing things up, through starting fires. All that stuff was like, you'd think someone had sat down, exercised professional curiosity and gone, hang on a minute, what is up with this kid? Why is this kid behaving like that? That didn't happen till in my 30s. And it's like Mike touched on before. I met someone who was my drug worker, and he sat me down and he said, Daniel, what is up with you? Why are you behaving like this? Why are you taking drugs? He did a little bit of self-disclosure, soft disclosure, and he told me a little bit about himself, a little bit about what had happened to him. And it was like, thank God for that. Not like in a weird way or anything, but I'd never spoke to anybody before who'd, as a man in particular, who'd disclosed that they'd been sexually abused. And like Mike said before, what he did that day is he gave me permission to speak. And he sort of gave me the words and he gave me the confidence and the courage. And I made a promise that day that I would do that for other people. And that's what happened to Mike. Not that I've saved him or anything like that. I just passed on what had been passed on to me.
Paid it forward.
So with both of you, when you were just talking about there, where you were talking about your experience of meeting the drugs caseworker and him giving you some of that information, you talking about going to Dan's workshop, you both, the way you described it was almost like that. It wasn't a gradual process. It was almost like something going off in your heads. Is that right?
I think one of the key things, Mike, and one of the key things that we've both learned is, so this is the real difficult thing. So the last time that we got vulnerable, we were sexually abused, yeah? So now, yeah, what we've got to learn of someone else is that vulnerability is the sharpest tool in your box, and that is the thing what's going to save you. So I had to expose my sort of vulnerabilities, talk about what happened to me, yeah, to say, look, this is my sharpest tool in my box is vulnerability, yeah, and that is only what's going to get you right. Yeah, you're gonna have to dig flipping deep. Do you know what I mean? Get vulnerable, talk about what's happened in order to get well and to get better. That is a massive risk for somebody who's got trust issues because of what's happened to the past. So the only way that we can do that is by speaking out on social media, using my Twitter platform.
It's interesting when you say there about vulnerability is hard because of the trust issues that have been, given to you. But also, would you mind me asking how old you are, Dan?
I'm 44 now.
44. So I imagine for someone of your age as well, when you were young growing up, that sort of vulnerability also there was a double level, because I think now sort of openness and talking about problems is becoming a lot more accepted. But when you were young, I imagine your background, that wasn't something men did.
If you go back all them years, I think one of the main things, if we look at like sort of damage and re-traumatizing yourself and stuff, because I didn't have the words at the time, because of what I was surrounded by, like toxic masculinity. I was surrounded by people who were selling drugs, people in gangs, people with dogs.
Couldn't talk about stuff like that.
What we do is we build up and we put these masks on. We walk about with our hoods up.
Back then, there was all this horrible language around people being gay and the words that people used to use back then that are disgusting. And again, like with me, pretty much the same with Dan, like early on before I found my feet and become a family person, I did get caught up in some pretty mad stuff. And now obviously they call it county lines, but the only people that showed us respect back then were the people that were either selling drugs to us or giving drugs to us. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. You can't mention that in them circles.
So you'd been through this process, Dan, where this is a little bit before you, Mike, obviously, but you found the ability to speak about it. And how did that manifest after that moment where you'd found that voice? What
happened is I went and sought support. So the guy said to me, he happened to be a psychotherapist, and he said to me, I'll do your deal. I'll get you in detox. I'll get you in rehab. And when you come out, I'll give you 20 sessions for free at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Right? I want to see your kind of sort of commitment and that. And I did it. I come out, I did it. I met up with him. And it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, because I was still, even though I was a grown man, I was in my 30s, my emotional development and my emotional intelligence was probably about a 13, 14-year-old boy, still making crazy decisions like a kid would make. Didn't have the words to talk about what had happened. For me to heal, it isn't everybody, but the devil was in the detail, because I carried this stuff around with me. My head was like a washing machine on spin cycle. That washing machine needed opening. And I had to go into specific detail about what had happened. It was really embarrassing. I was full of shame. I was full of guilt, because it was like, if you think of 27, it took me 27 years to disclose. So if you think of around about that time, you think about 27 years of not talking to anybody, keeping all this stuff to yourself, you come up with your own conclusions about what's happened. You start blaming yourself, particularly with the guy. When I was older, when I was 15, because people might think, why don't you just do him in? Why couldn't you get away from him? The thing is, it was scarier for me to leave and go out into that big wide world than it was to stay with him. I knew what was happening. I knew I was getting sexually abused. I knew when it was happening. If I went out there to no one on the streets or whatever, nowhere to live, I didn't know what was going to flipping happen. So I stayed with him until, thankfully for me, I got arrested and sent to prison. And that's how I kind of got away from him, really. But it's back to that thing. Nobody ever exercised professional curiosity, even as an adult, till I was like in late adulthood, and said, Daniel, why are you behaving like this? Daniel, what is up with you? And that's why one of our sort of key messages to professionals out there is, when you see a child behaving a certain way or acting a certain way, have that confidence and courage, to ask, is everything, it's dead simple. It's not rocket science what we do. It's like, has something happened to you at home? Did something happen to you when you was a child? Have you experienced some kind of trauma? There's a big misconception that from professionals, drug workers, probation, police, all them social workers, that if they ask somebody, have you experienced trauma as a child, that they're going to smash into a million pieces. So I've worked with over 300 men now who've experienced trauma, and from me asking that question to them, nobody smashed into a million pieces. And people think, oh, it's going to open a can of worms. Bollocks. What it does is it opens up the door and it gives you an opportunity to speak.
Do you think that with your background, you're obviously a very down-to-earth person. Do you think it helps men like Mike open up rather than somebody that might be a sort of like educated professional who might not have experienced things themselves? Or do you think it's just as powerful for anyone to ask the question?
We're now educating professionals.
Right. Okay, so let's go through that.
So I went off doing what I was doing. He was doing what he was doing. We met up in Manchester City Centre for a kebab, and we went over to the Arndale car park, and we spoke to security, and we went, can we go on the roof, please, and take some pictures of the city? And this, lo and behold, the security guards let us in, and he's chatting away, he's walked us up to the top floor, and we stood on the top floor, we looked out over the city centre, and I said to Mike, me and you, between us, have caused pure carnage in this city through our behaviour as young people, selling drugs, committing crime, robbing people, all that kind of stuff. Well, I'll speak for myself, that was like sort of going on. It's like, how can we pay this back? We've caused murders. And Mike went, let's do a campaign called Follow Me Our Kid. And
it was like, Mancunian.
Yeah.
It's like, let's do a campaign called Follow Me Our Kid. And like, what do you mean? And we've got like a pretty decent Twitter platform with loads of professionals following us and stuff. And we started a campaign, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to focus on professional curiosity, because it's like, what you're doing ain't helping, nothing's changing, no one's paying attention. I'm screaming and shouting like a tool at Speaker's Corner and flipping outside Parliament. No one's listening to me. Let's put our heads together and do a campaign. Let's speak openly online about our experiences, see what happens. So all the stuff that we've learned about trauma and failures, let's pass that on to professionals. And for people who have been sexually abused, we'll share our own experiences and hope someone can connect. So, you know, like you were saying, so as like sort of a man speaking out about this stuff, that really doesn't go on, to be honest with you. It's very rare that you can find someone who's like sort of doing that and said, let's be those people. So we started doing this campaign within... I don't know, it must have been within a month.
How long ago was this?
12 months.
12 months.
Yeah.
So you stopped paedophile hunting then to do this project?
We couldn't do the both. So I had, not mentioning any names, I'd spoke about me and Mike partnering up, and people was like, whoa, like professionals, police, he's a paedophile and a vigilante, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to work, blah, blah, blah. So it was like, we need to show this transition. So we done a video online saying Mike had left hunting and stuff. People still weren't happy about it, but we was like, we know what we're doing. We're gonna smash it. So we said, let's start it up. Let's start something called Lads Like Us, for lads like us, and speak about our trauma and share stuff with professionals up and down the country. Now we've constantly got heads of services, heads of social services, heads of the youth justice team. All the organisation, housing groups, our inbox is bombarded to come in and deliver training around professional curiosity. What we're doing is we're using what we've got, which is our experience, which is our lived experience, and the impact, I'm not just saying it, the impact that we're making is
Mm.
massive, and we're just inundated from heads of organisations up and down the country to share our...
Going from paedophile hunter to being in partnership with Bernardo's.
So, yeah.
Is that you in partnership?
Yeah.
Right.
So Bernardo's contacted us. They wanted us to do a video with them. So we did a video with them a couple of months ago. And now we deliver training with Bernardo's. And we're just flooded.
It's amazing.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Often people think about therapy and seeking it out at the point in their life that they've reached an impassable obstacle. In my personal experience, therapy and counselling is something that can be used for anything, any point in your life, and you can use it for small problems as well as big problems. Talking to people really helps, and talking to licensed counsellors can give you a set of tools that can help you navigate the stresses and complications of daily life. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/minuteswith. That's BetterHelp, patreon.com/minuteswith.
And do you feel like what's really apparent from both of you guys is like, through whatever paths you've taken, it's like it really feels like you want to help. Like you're trying to find ways to help.
Paying it forward, power one.
Paying it forward. But it's like, it is very sort of moving to hear you talk about the fact that bad things have happened to you and your main goal is to make, it's not to get revenge or to be...
Mike, do you want to talk about demons?
Do you know what? I live outside of Manchester now, and he lives in central Manchester. So I jumped in the car the other day, got my Starbucks, I'm driving down, stuck in traffic on the motorway. So I rang him and I was like, how are you? And he was like, yeah. I said, I'm 20 minutes away from you. And we was talking about, obviously, coming to London, doing the next LADbible and all these different things. And I said to him, I was like, do you know what? I said, in reflection, the one thing I've grown to understand and I've grown to realise is that all these demons that I've been running away from, that we've been running away from, that have been constantly causing carnage in our lives are actually our best asset. Because we've overcome them. Like, who would we be if we'd not overcome all that shit that we've been through? And that, you know, it's a pretty powerful statement that when you think of it.
It's like, how can we turn like a sort of negative into a positive? They say you can't polish a turd, but we're gleaming. Do you know what I mean? We're like kind of gleaming examples of that, and all it has took is by somebody helping us and us witnessing from other people. Sack all that toxic masculinity bullshit aside. By vulnerable males in society speaking out about mental health, about how they're feeling, and like us latching onto that and thinking, right, God, if they can do it, we can do it. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing special about me and him. We've just found our voice and somebody give us permission to speak, and that's what we hope will come from this, that people will seek support. And me and him have not he is not under the table now in the fetal position. Do you know what I mean? Crying because he spoke about what's happened. I'm not. What you're seeing before you now is two men who are empowered, passing stuff on to men. Do you know what I mean? And it's like you said, Mike, you know, the change isn't coming, the change is already here.
It's already here.
Because we're sat here talking about it now.
And what you say there, because what you just said about the demons, that is actually a really powerful statement, because essentially what you're saying is where you are now, which is your best versions of yourselves, has happened because of the things that initially set your lives on a very dark path. And I guess what that means to accept that is that you must have grown to love yourselves.
Yeah, that's without you can't love anything until you love yourself. That's part of the recovery. That's not even part of recovery. That's part of the healing process. Anybody that's been through any kind of trauma when they was kids, it's not their fault. They were children. It doesn't matter what kind of trauma it is. You know, let's not just generalize on sexual abuse. There's kids out there who have, you know, lost a parent or they've lost a sibling, and that trauma is just as traumatic, sometimes worse to them, because each person reacts to trauma in a different way. It's about using that elephant in the room and using the thing that has controlled you for so long, getting it in an headlock, whacking it in a cupboard, and sitting down and having a brew with it and saying, right, how are we gonna? We need to sort this shit out, because there's no way I'm being controlled by you. And that's exactly what we've done. You know, we took all that badness, and now we know, you know, in the past 12 months, we've trained over 1,300 professionals, from social workers to police to guest lecturing at universities up and down the country. Like, the past 12 months has been mental.
Where you started is the thing that had happened to you. You were very focused on that thing. You know, the paedophile hunting was essentially what happened to you. You were trying to stop that thing happening again. Yeah. When you're talking about trauma there, it feels like you've broadened your horizons a lot. Yeah,
I had to, because, you know, talking about paedophilia and rape and sexual abuse of children, so a lot of people, it's not palatable. They don't want to talk about that, because that literally is the elephant in the room. That is the taboo. People don't want to hear that. You know, it's all good people seeing a LADbible video on the internet with a paedophile hunter. The thing that draws them to that is the fact that I was a paedophile hunter. But let's not get it twisted. It's a form of trauma. Trauma creates behaviours. Behaviours can manifest in various different ways. And, you know, trauma is accountable for a lot of things in life, whatever the trauma is. So it's important that I broaden those horizons And I learned about the different types of trauma that I've been through, because it's not just a singular type of trauma. And when you put trauma not in one trough, but when you look at them as all different types of trauma, what you realise is those are adverse childhood experiences called ACEs, and they affect everyone.
I think an important point to make here, Mike, is that I didn't kind of cover before. So when we were shouting and screaming about what had happened to us and the failures and stuff like that, it was totally unpalatable for people, totally unpalatable for professionals, totally unpalatable for those who was trying to hold to account and stuff. So we thought that was another thing we discussed. How can we make this subject palatable? And one of the in things at the moment, or one of the buzzwords, like Mike said, was ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And it's like, that's a lot more palatable than talking about being raped and sexually abused. So we kind of grabbed that, harnessed that, and presented to the world about adverse childhood experiences, spoke about our other traumas, about parents disappearing and all the other kind of stuff that had happened to us, and that became palatable.
Do you think that it's helped you a lot that you're essentially changing the system from inside the system now?
Yeah.
Because before you were both outside it, weren't you?
Yeah.
People are listening. And I'm quite open about the fact that I was a paedophile hunter. And, you know, that's part of my journey. And that's part of the trauma reenactment. And that's part of, like I said to you, it's about showing that transition. Even though paedophile hunting was a positive thing, it was something that took me to a dark place, whereas now I'm not in a dark place and I can concentrate on the good that I'm doing. Whereas then I couldn't, because I was just surrounded by chat logs of people wanting to hurt kids.
What would you say individually, each of you, if you want to go first, Dan, what's your goal? Like, when you get to 70, what do you look back on and think, I'm glad I achieved that?
I want to be part of the generation that says enough is enough, that encouraging other people to stand up and pay attention to the damage that trauma causes, and encourage people to safeguarding, I think, is everybody's responsibility. It's not just teachers' responsibility. It's not just like police's responsibility. As society, we have a responsibility to safeguard. I'll just tell you something rapid. So this is what gave me a kick up the arse. So a guy's come in our house to clean our carpet, and he was telling me some horrific stories about what he's seen while he's been cleaning carpets, like people beating up the missus, kids neglected, shitting nappies everywhere, drugs paraphernalia out, kids about, and I'm like, what did you do about it? Oh, nothing, because my name's on company house, so if I say anything about it, someone might come round to my house. But it's like safeguarding wasn't his responsibility. Do you know what I mean? But how do we expect things to change if everyone's got their head in the flipping sand like a flipping ostrich? Do you know what I mean? What we want to do is, or what I believe we're doing is pioneering a trauma-informed wave up and down the country. And we are actually doing that to the point we've just got flipping national, where we're delivering stuff up and down the country, and we want to leave a legacy behind for our kids. That's what I want to do.
Beautiful answer. How about you, Mike?
Pretty much what you said. Honestly, it's liberating. It's liberating. I already thought I kind of left a little bit of a legacy for my kids with everything that I did. But the fact that through the internet and obviously through you guys, they've been able to see the transition. When they're older, they'll be able to look back and say, wow, that's where he started and that's where he ended up. I've not just left it and gone and got a 9 to 5. Like,
We've evolved.
I've evolved and got, I don't know how many hours of work now.
If you could speak to your target audience, the people you're trying to reach, what would you want to say to them?
Be professionally curious, Instead of looking at the case, look at the child. Remember, especially to the professionals that will see this, people like social workers, people that do work within the police, people that do work with vulnerable people, whether that be children or vulnerable adults. These people are vulnerable for a reason. And sometimes, they might behave in certain ways, but it's about looking beyond the behaviour and more towards the cause of the behaviour.
Mike's covered the professional side. I think my message would be for people who have been sexually abused, and I think it's really important that, there's this terminology that's bandied about that's called being a survivor, as in someone who's experienced sexual abuse, and it's like it kind of sort of ends there, and you're just stuck as a survivor. So for me, I was a victim for many years, and also kind of sort of rightly so in some ways, like sort of played the victim. Look at me, look what's happened to me, my life's just shit. I'm going to be angry at the world, I'm going to commit crime, I'm going to ruin everybody else's life. I was stuck in victim mode. And the reason for that is I got comfortable with my own shit, because the thought of speaking out and the thought of moving forward, the thought of talking about what's happened to me seemed too scary. So when that guy spoke to me and encouraged me to speak out and give me permission to speak, I stopped surviving. What I did is I started living. I dropped that victimhood, that victim mentality. I stopped surviving, because surviving just means I was just like getting through the day. I was taking a lot of drugs to survive. I was committing crime. I was hanging about with all kinds of different people where I thought I'd fit in. I wasn't living. When I dropped that survivor stuff, and realised, hang on a minute, I've survived here. Do you know what I mean? What's next? What's next is I started living, started enjoying my life, stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped always focusing on the past, and just like sort of moving forward. I'm not saying I don't have shit days. I'm not saying you're going to have shit days, because I do. But if I can sort myself out, he can sort himself out. There ain't nothing special about me and him, and you can sort yourself out. Just go and seek support. What I'm saying is, do your research first. Find out what support services around your area. Find someone who you trust to speak to, who can support you, who's going to listen to you and see you through the process, and you can do it.
That's a wonderful message. And listen, you're both a really inspirational pair of guys. It's been a pleasure to know you and to meet you.
Thanks.
And we will stay in touch, and hopefully in a couple of years there'll be another update.
Yeah.
Even more news and the world domination you mentioned. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your time. Thanks everybody.
Cheers.
When I was 24, and the opening lines are, Jonathan was born on the 31st of the 10th, 1984. Both parents were horrified by the child's appearance. Both parents felt no maternal bond. Both parents left the hospital 36 hours later, leaving the child behind.